Let's welcome Paul Kohlhaas, CEO of Molecule.
Hi, everyone. Cool. How's everyone feeling? It's been a long week, eh? But huge kudos to William and Jason and the whole Sora team for putting this event together. It's actually one of our first times that the DeSci community is really coming to Asia. And yeah, we're really excited about the warm reception and all the interest. So I'm here today to talk to all of you about decentralized science and what we're doing at Molecule in order to really revolutionize the way that IP is transacted and that scientific research is funded and decentralized. My name is Paul Kohlhaas. I'm the CEO and co-founder of an organization called Molecule. My background of coming into this field is a little bit atypical. So I spent a lot of time in online research communities as a kid, as a teenager. These were communities that were looking, for example, at biohacking, online diabetes communities, HIV communities, or communities that were looking at psychedelic research, for instance. So lots of like fringy communities. And I began realizing that big reason why these people were there is because they had a need that was not being met by the current pharmaceutical system. And so people have a tendency to get together online and form collaborations. And these were for me like early stages of like open source drug development. So in a similar vein of what we have happening in the software development space, people have been trying to collaborate much more openly around how drugs are being developed for a while. I got into crypto in 2015 and had a very similar experience there as I had in these open source biohacking and open source drug development communities. And Molecule is really the culmination of both of those things. Cool, so science today is full of problems. If you talk to a scientist today, we typically get a quote that they spend 80% of their time applying for funding and 20% of the time doing the science. So funding today is highly competitive and asymmetrically distributed. In fact, it's so bad that most scientists would change their topics. So they would research something completely different just because one field offers more funding than another. There's an issue with replication, so a lot of scientific research, especially in the biotech field, is not reproducible. If a biotech company, for example, researches a specific medicine, they often only share the positive data about a drug that they're developing. So let's say they ran 100 studies, and of those 100 studies, 98 didn't work, and one was inconclusive and one was positive. Today, the way that the industry works is to actually only share the positive result. And these results are often not reproducible. And so organizations work in silos and often fail to actually report these negative results. Science today is hyper-competitive, which really creates perverse incentives for collaboration. Lastly, science today is really inaccessible. Much of scientific literature lives behind paywalls. And as we saw with the earlier speaker, Patrick around Research Hub, phenomenons like Research Hub, where scientists are much more openly debating and sharing each other's work, are relatively new and really important phenomenons. I just said this earlier, I spend 80% of their time today applying for funding, 20% doing the science. And most of the world's scientific talent in our kind of conception actually remains untapped. And so how can we help, in the same way that a lot of software development talent used to be untapped, like in the 80s and 90s, if you wanted to work in software development, you'd have to go to Silicon Valley, you have to work at IBM or Microsoft, and what open source software really enabled was the global culmination of software talent. And this is one really important thing that we're trying to enable through decentralized science, is for that talent to actually become united. So DeSci today really operates as a collaborative ecosystem already. We'll have a panel later where we're going to discuss how different BioDAOs, for example, are already collaborating. But here's a fairly outdated, actually, overview of the ecosystem. This is from October 2022, actually. So since then, the ecosystem has really grown and exploded, so to speak. These are just some of the organizations that we work with or that are using our underlying protocol. So what kind of verticals are we actually seeing in the DeSci space today? So there's funding, intellectual property, or research and development focused DAOs. And they enable faster and more democratic funding mechanisms that really enable communities to form and govern in a given therapeutic area. A second big one is publishing. A third big one is reproducibility, and a fourth big pillar is identity and reputation systems for scientists. Today, we're going to focus on funding IP and research and development DAOs, or what we've come to call as BioDAOs, because it's one area where we're just seeing the most amount of progress. And some very brief overview of Molecule. We've had over 1,200 projects, scientific projects from all over the world that have kind of applied and come through our system. We've supported over the creation of over 8 BioDAOs already. These communities hold over 20,000 members. It's a very rough number. I think it's more in the 50s. 35 million in total have been raised through our ecosystem. And the collective market capitalization of these projects is almost approaching 200 million. And so what we're really aimed at doing is creating a collaborative ecosystem that brings together stakeholders and provides basic infrastructure for them to port IP into Web3 and to govern scientific research. So at Molecule, we're really changing the way that intellectual property works in early stage drug development. And we are focused on making IP transactable in Web3 and enabling sustainability for research organizations on-chain. So what's really broken with IP? IP as an asset class has really barely evolved over the last 50, 60, 70 years. And with IP, we typically mean the form of IP that you use in the biotech space, for example, where you typically want to patent something in order to actually be able to recoup the high costs of drug development. Unfortunately, doing fully open source drug development is not possible today in the way that the pharmaceutical system is actually structured. So many of you have probably heard about clinical trials. The average cost of getting a drug all the way through clinical trials can be upwards of $2.5 billion. And unfortunately, as soon as you make something fully open source in drug development, it becomes unpatentable, which means that no one is ever going to give you money to finance those really expensive trials. Unfortunately, that's the government monopoly that we live in with the FDA and the European Medical Agency. And in our view, patents create a really monopolistic and perverse incentive scheme in this kind of long development cycle. Because now you have one entity that controls the IP, that owns the patent. And as I said earlier, that only has an incentive to publish positive data about a drug, but doesn't actually create a good peer-reviewed system around whether this drug might actually work or not. The second one is that patents today are really analog. So if you file for a patent with the US Patent Office, you're going to end up with literally boxes and boxes of papers. It's a highly bureaucratic, very slow-moving system. If you've ever been onto the website of the USPTO, it's like a way-back machine to the year 2000. Very hard to use. Their patents today are illiquid. They're hard to transact, so they're typically inside of equity vehicles. And it's quite hard to actually, to sell a patent, to license a patent. And then the last thing, if you've ever tried to work with a university tech transfer office, actually wait, maybe let me quickly ask, who's ever tried to work with a university tech transfer office? Cool, about 4 or 5 people, 6, 7 people. If you've ever tried to work with one of them, out-licensing out of a university tech transfer office is incredibly hard. So if we had standardized global frameworks, this could be a lot better. And so Molecule, we're really revolutionizing how intellectual property works in early stage drug development and science. This is kind of the typical innovation funnel that you see happening inside of organizations today. And so you have lots of ideas emerge, and then typically one idea makes it to market. And drug development really works in a similar way. However, diseases are global phenomena, right? It's like diseases like cancer or cardiovascular diseases. There's global patient population, yet most companies are actually just kind of in this rat race trying to outcompete each other to find a cure and then patent it, rather than working on it together in a globally connected way. And so, so this is how companies develop drugs today. And our idea at Molecule is really to open up that funnel and create a global marketplace and a global ecosystem where new medicine can be collaboratively developed. In order to achieve this, we've developed a new kind of legal and technological primitive, which is called an IPNFT. And we really see these IPNFTs as building blocks for DeSci. So IPNFTs are programmable, they're easily transactable, they're highly liquid, and they're data rich. So in the same way that I can transfer an NFT that contains an artwork, we began asking ourselves, cool, what if instead of attaching an artwork, we attach a composition of matter pattern, like the fundamental new description of a molecule, and then all of the underlying associated data. What this results in is a global marketplace where researchers from all over the world can list their IP and then receive funding for it and transact with the research. This is the anatomy of an IP NFT today. So you typically have a legal contract, like a real world license, a real world legal contract, with identities of the recipients, wallet addresses. This is then hashed onto a smart contract. And then the underlying research data and kind of the secret sauce of the IP is encrypted on a combination of Arweave and Filecoin using the protocol. So essentially what you end up with is you can now transact real-world IP or real-world medical patent within minutes, and in a fully secure and safe way. Typically how this works is you have a researcher that wants to do a research project and is willing to fund some of his or her IP, willing to sell some of his or her IP, and then interacts with someone who wants to own the IP and is willing to fund the research. There's typically a negotiation until a license agreement is created, and then everything is stored in a smart contract on Ethereum. This is not theory. So since over 1.5 years, organizations have already been using this framework and funding research at universities across the globe. This, for example, for instance, is a project on autophagy activators with Newcastle University from a doctor called Viktor Korolchuk. We're going to dive a little bit deeper into how this project has been progressing on chain. So next, we really also then began creating a new asset class that makes translational research fundable and governable by patients, researchers, entrepreneurs, and communities. So IPNFTs are typically held by a DAO. So you have a DAO that can form around managing an IP portfolio now in a given therapeutic area. For instance, BioDAO is one of the most common ones that is funding research into aging and longevity. The next thing, though, that can be done is you can mint now intellectual property tokens. So essentially, you're fractionalizing governance rights in the underlying IP. So the IP NFT can further be tokenized through a wrapper. And then IPTs now transform research outcomes into composable digital assets and just enable global network effects to emerge. For example, you can now create bounties around specific research outputs. You can raise additional funding for the underlying research, and you get a liquid market for the IP. So IPTs can now be exchanged for work, funding, or for contributions around the asset. IPTs also enable open source collaboration around the asset without losing any of the commercial viability. What this means is essentially you don't need to create equity vehicles anymore or startups to fundraise for specific scientific research, or actually already for advanced stage drug development. In June this year, there was a first kind of public auction for IP tokens, which is now under the name of VitaFast. So first IP tokens crowd sale was performed on this Korolchuk IPNFT and really was a huge success. We had over 200 participants and the auction was 1,700% oversubscribed. The current market cap is, I think it might be 14 now, it's between 14 and 15 million. So the research was initially priced at cost, so BioDAO paid $285,000 to fund this research, and now the market is valuing the research at 14 million. So you can also start seeing how these are actually viable business models that are developing there. Yeah, so the initial price discovery started out between 350K and 1.4 million. So this is now a university research asset that is trading on Uniswap. The researcher holds ownership in these tokens as well. The tech transfer office has tokens in it. And we had this initial phase of price discovery. We like to do a lot of Fast and Furious memes around Vita Fast. Maybe the name actually, autophagy activators are commonly, if you're not familiar with the term autophagy is commonly activated by fasting. So that's the mimetic that we built in. And then over September and October, you really had more and more positive data released about the project, which led to a price discovery phase that has recently brought up the market cap to 50 million. We really want to bring DeSci to Asia, so we haven't yet minted any IPNFTs with Asian universities. And so we're really excited to announce that we're providing a $50,000 sponsored research grant for a first Asian scientist team to mint an IPNFT. If you have any friends that are working at universities or scientists, please let them know. We'd be really excited to fund the first team here. Cool, so how is this all moving into an ecosystem? So, as I said at the beginning of the talk, we've had over 1,000 research applications. What we're also going to start doing is actually tokenizing this earliest part of the funnel. So if you're a scientist or just someone who's really into the science and loves reading up on it, you can actually already begin engaging in these earliest stage projects. So we've had over 1,000 of those, over 11 IPNFTs minted, and then one of them has been fractionalized. Kind of the core metric that we're looking at as an ecosystem is what is the total market cap of IP in DeSci, right? Because now we're making everything liquid, you can kind of value everything live, which we think is really interesting. And so our goal is actually to bring the number of applications next year to 10, 20,000 and really growing all of these metrics. The ultimate goal is obviously to out-license IP or for communities themselves to begin commercializing and kind of bringing these new treatments and new medicines to patients. As I said earlier, BioDAO is one of the leading organizations that is using this framework. We'll have them on stage in a minute. So BioDAO is really focused on funding early stage longevity research. It's already funded over 20 different projects with a total of $6 million. 200 projects are under active review. Over 70 projects have been evaluated. Vita's current market cap is sitting at about 80 million. And so the way that BioDAO works is BioDAO is comprised of different scientific working groups with researchers from all over the world that are actively bringing in new research and evaluating kind of the research that other people are submitting. And so it's this mix of like kind of, if you've ever applied for a grant, like an NIH grant, and then a biotech VC, and then a big scientific community that is openly discussing ideas. And the goal is really to fund moonshots, things that haven't been tried yet, or that might seem too crazy for other organizations. As I said earlier, like science funding is typically really slow. Like it can sometimes take up to a year for a researcher to even hear back whether they get funded or not. And so with Newcastle University, this project that I mentioned earlier, Vita Fast, we funded the researcher within 3 weeks from beginning to talk to them. The university had the money in their bank account. Which we think is really impressive. These are some of the other projects that have been funded. One is, for example, with the University of Copenhagen, the Scheibe-Knudsen Laboratory. Another one is with a researcher called Van der Fang at University of Oslo. And then the one that I mentioned, University of Newcastle. The funding amounts to IPNFTs typically tend to be at around 100,000, 250,000, up to $500,000. So we were very involved in building BioDAO and in understanding that so first of all, building something in biotech is really, really hard. Like it's science, you need to think about commercialization, the whole bureaucracy, the whole regulatory landscape, very different subclass of investors. And then, as many of you probably know, building in Web3 is also really, really hard. And building a DAO it's a very crazy experience if any of you have ever tried to build a real DAO with a public token. And so we realized, okay, building these biotech DAOs is super hard. Like, you got to understand biotech, and then you have to understand Web3 for it to work. And so about a year ago, at Molecule, we launched BioXYZ, which is really an accelerator and a decentralized community for the creation of biotech DAOs. So we help co-found biotech DAOs. We provide DAOs with hands-on support and $100,000 in a convertible grant. And then really a network of builders. There's a whole program that comes with it. Then we provide battle-tested BioDAO frameworks. So a suite of tools, Web3 tools, and kind of white label solutions that enable folks to scale and build their DAO. And then really a community of builders that have successfully already kind of been through it. So kind of taking a lot of inspiration from Y Combinator, some of you are familiar with that. These are some of the first DAOs that have come through BioXYZ. These are kind of independent founders that approached us, and we were really lucky to be able to be part of their journey and help them build. We'll hear about them from them just now, but some of them, for example, Valley DAO, Athena DAO, Cryo DAO, Hair DAO. Most of you, I think, or some of your favorite DeSci DAOs, I would hope. This is, for example, Valley DAO's website, some of the research projects that they've already funded, that they're actively working on. And then I'm excited to make a small announcement. So we're increasingly focused on the decentralization of BioXYZ itself and preparing to launch Bio. Bio really represents governance and value of all the underlying tokens that BioXYZ has. So today that's over kind of 50 million in governance value that will be beginning to kind of tokenize into the community. So to finish off, I think I'm running a little bit over on time. We really want to build towards this future where scientists spend 80% doing the science and only 20% applying for the funding. Because I think there's so much amazing scientific potential and amazing scientific innovation to unearth. Like, there are so many problems that we have yet to fix. Like think alone about climate change. And the more we can accelerate the speed of innovation in science, the better I think our future will be. We are building towards a world where patient and research communities govern cures and access to medications, instead of a world where this is controlled by big corporations. And we are working towards a world of permissionless science. In the same way that we have permissionless finance today, we should have permissionless science. We should have science that is self-sovereign, like that owns itself and that becomes unstoppable. So much amazing scientific innovation, specifically in the medical space, is often shelved. So we might have already come across the cure for cancer, but someone was just like, nah. And if we make science unstoppable and on-chain, then I think that's a real future. Cool. If you want to get involved, if any of this resonated with you, sounded exciting, actually all of these communities have Discords and are really open communities. If you're a scientist, as I said earlier, apply to get funding. We're really committed to this $50,000 grant. Funding a DAO or get involved in an IPT. If you're into fasting or autophagy, there's one that you can get involved in already. And then also we're actively hiring. We're looking to expand our team in Asia, actively hiring growth managers. Yeah. Cool. William? And I guess I'll stop there.